Imagine walking onto a film set and realizing it doesn't feel like work at all. No chatter, no jokes, no small talk, only silence, trembling hands, and tears. That's what happened during the filming of The Chosen's most difficult episode yet. The Crucifixion of Jesus. Cast members, extras, even makeup artists and camera operators found themselves breaking down in tears. Some described it not as a movie shoot, but as something closer to church. But why? What made this particular production so different? After all, Jesus has been portrayed countless times in films, plays, and paintings. What was it about this moment, this series, this cast, that caused everyone involved to say it was unlike anything they had ever experienced? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on The Chosen, the series that began as a crowd-funded experiment and has now become one of the most watched shows about Jesus in history. With over 250 million viewers worldwide, it has touched audiences far beyond traditional religious circles, resonating with skeptics, believers, and the simply curious. And at the center of it all is Jonathan Roumie, whose portrayal of Jesus has been called both heartbreakingly human and spiritually transcendent. But behind the cameras lies a story most viewers have never heard. From a sacred filming location in Italy once used for Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, to moments when actors could barely finish their lines through sobs, to a post-shoot meal that felt less like lunch and more like Holy Communion. The making of this crucifixion scene was more than storytelling. It became an act of devotion. And it wasn't just Jonathan Roumie carrying that weight. Director Dallas Jenkins, the man who never thought The Chosen would even last beyond season 1, stood on the hill in tears, describing the process not as direction, but as devotion. The whole crew felt it. This wasn't simply art, it was sacred memory, retold in a way that could break hearts and heal them too. So in this video, we're diving deep into what really happened on set during the filming of The Crucifixion. Why did it leave actors shattered, crew members trembling, and millions of fans worldwide anticipating the release with a sense of awe? And what does it reveal about faith, storytelling, and the surprising ways God can use art to touch the soul? Stay with us, because by the end, you may never see The Chosen or the story of the cross the same way again. When The Chosen first appeared, few believed it would amount to much. A faith-based drama about the life of Jesus, made outside of Hollywood and funded almost entirely by ordinary people through crowdfunding. The odds were stacked against it. In an industry dominated by flashy blockbusters and tightly controlled studio productions, a series like this seemed destined to get lost. And yet, something unexpected happened. People showed up, not just a handful of viewers, but millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. Today, The Chosen has been translated into over 70 languages and has been streamed in more than 190 countries. In a world where entertainment often feels disposable, this show has become one of the most watched series about Jesus ever made. So what explains its rise? Why do audiences across cultures, backgrounds, and even belief systems gravitate to it? The answer is layered, but at its core lies a single principle: the humanization of the divine. Most portrayals of Jesus in art or film lean heavily into his divinity. He often comes across as distant, almost untouchable, a glowing figure speaking in lofty tones. That may inspire reverence, but it doesn't always inspire intimacy. The Chosen took a different route. Jonathan Roumie, under Dallas Jenkins' direction, brought Jesus closer to the viewer. This wasn't a stained glass figure frozen in solemnity, but a living man who laughed, cried, danced at weddings, and joked with friends. That shift matters more than we realize. When viewers see Jesus joke about Simon Peter's dancing or laugh with his disciples, it doesn't diminish his holiness, it enhances it. Because if Jesus was fully human as well as fully divine, then his laughter, his friendships, and his tears mattered just as much as his miracles. For many viewers, this was the first time they saw Jesus not just as a savior to worship, but as a friend they could relate to. But there's another element. The Chosen broke denominational barriers. It wasn't made for one church tradition or theological niche. Evangelicals, Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and even those outside of Christianity found something to hold on to. On set, extras described the atmosphere as not a religious thing, but a spiritual one. The cast and crew came from diverse backgrounds, but all were united by the story itself. In many ways, that inclusivity mirrors the original impact of Jesus' ministry. The first followers of Christ weren't a homogeneous group. They were tax collectors, fishermen, zealots, and even skeptics. What bound them together wasn't sameness, but the transformative presence of Jesus. The Chosen captures that same spirit, creating a kind of modern fellowship among viewers who might otherwise never sit in the same pew. The show's rise also owes much to its unconventional distribution. Instead of relying on traditional studios, it went straight to the people. Through apps, streaming platforms, and even theatrical releases, the creators embraced a pay-it-forward model, allowing those who could afford it to support free viewing for others. This broke down financial barriers and made the series accessible worldwide. For many in countries with limited access to Christian resources, this was a first-time encounter with such a vivid retelling of the Gospels. But beyond strategy, beyond innovation, the true reason The Chosen resonates is because it touches something deeper, the longing for story. Human beings are wired for narrative. Facts inform us, but stories transform us. When we watch Matthew wrestle with rejection, or Mary Magdalene find redemption, or Simon Peter struggle with doubt, we don't just see characters, we see ourselves. Their weaknesses echo our own. Their victories give us hope. And their encounters with Jesus remind us that transformation is possible for anyone. It's this blend of accessibility, authenticity, and artistry that set The Chosen apart. And it's why by the time season 6 began filming, expectations weren't just high, they were reverent. Fans didn't simply want entertainment. They wanted to be moved, changed, and reminded of the story that has shaped history. This context matters because it explains why the crucifixion scene was so much more than another episode in a long-running series. By the time cameras rolled in Italy, the world was watching, not just to see how Dallas Jenkins and his team would handle the most pivotal moment in Christian history, but to see whether the emotional weight that had carried the series so far would rise to meet the cross itself. And rise it did. But before we step into that hilltop in Italy, it's worth pausing on the question that hovers over this entire story. Can art really capture the sacred? Can a television series convey not only the suffering of Christ, but the holiness behind it? The answer, as we'll see in the next section, isn't found only in the final product on screen. It's found in the tears, the silence, and the trembling that swept through the people who lived it on set. When season 6 of The Chosen moved production from Utah to Italy, it wasn't just a matter of scenery. The team deliberately chose a hill that carried a haunting familiarity. Years earlier, this very landscape had hosted Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. To step onto that ground again was to step into a place already marked by prayer, by memory, and by cinematic history. Dallas Jenkins, the director, admitted that from the moment they arrived, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't like other days on set. Something felt weightier, quieter, like stepping into holy ground. Normally, film sets are buzzing with activity. Technicians call out directions, actors rehearse lines, assistants scurry with props, and laughter often cuts through the long hours. But not this time. In Italy, when the crucifixion sequence began, laughter vanished, jokes died in throats. A hush descended, as if the entire crew sensed they were about to reenact something too sacred for casual words. Extras described it later as a silence that felt alive. The actors felt it most. Jonathan Roumie, stepping into the role of Jesus, had been preparing for this moment for years, but nothing could fully prepare him for the weight of embodying Christ on the cross. Hours of physical endurance, lying stretched out, bound, and pierced were demanding enough. Yet it was the emotional toll that nearly broke him. Roumie confessed in interviews that he wasn't just acting these scenes, he was emptying himself, asking God to take over where his own strength ended. And he wasn't the only one. Those portraying Mary, John, and Mary Magdalene could barely keep their composure. Their tears weren't rehearsed, they were real, flowing naturally as if they, too, were standing at the foot of Calvary. Even the Roman soldier tasked with driving the nails trembled. His hammer strikes looked fierce, but his hands shook afterward, and he admitted he felt like he needed forgiveness. He wasn't just playing a role. In some mysterious way, he felt complicit. Then came the sound, the strike of hammer against wood. One blow, echoing across the hill, froze everyone in place. A chill ran through cast and crew alike. People behind the cameras covered their mouths in shock. Makeup artists, camera operators, sound engineers, professionals used to keeping their focus, found themselves wiping away tears. Some had to turn away for a moment, unable to watch. What was unfolding didn't feel staged, it felt lived. Dallas Jenkins, normally the steady hand behind the lens, admitted later that he could barely hold back his own tears. He stood, watching not as a director but as a believer, absorbing the sacred weight of what was happening in that moment. He wasn't concerned about camera angles or retakes. He was overwhelmed by the reminder that the story he was helping tell wasn't fiction. It was the echo of the most defining sacrifice in history. Jonathan Roumie himself was deeply shaken. He sat quietly, eyes closed, the imprint of the crown still on his forehead. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Others noticed that he carried the weight of Jesus with him even after the cameras stopped rolling, as though he hadn't fully stepped out of the role. Another actor whispered that it felt wrong to joke or break the moment, because what they had experienced wasn't just acting, it was devotion. Even days later, the weight lingered. Some actors said they cried all night after filming. One extra admitted she couldn't stop thinking about the sound of the hammer. Crew members spoke of a heaviness that clung to them, not as a burden, but as a sacred memory. And when Roumie finally posted a photo beside the cross on Instagram, his words were few, but heavy. He asked for prayers for himself and the cast, calling it the most demanding work of his life. Fans didn't need details. The photo alone carried enough sorrow to move thousands to tears. For most actors, finishing a role means stepping out of character, shaking off the emotions, and returning to normal life. But for Jonathan Roumie, playing Jesus in The Chosen has never been that simple. From the beginning, he knew the role would demand more than performance. It would require surrender. And during season 6, as he carried the weight of the crucifixion, that surrender reached its deepest point. Roumie has often said that he doesn't view his portrayal as just a job. It is a calling, one that comes with both privilege and pain. As filming moved toward the crucifixion, he began preparing weeks in advance, not only physically but spiritually. He trained his body to handle the long, grueling hours under the weight of the cross. But he also turned to prayer, fasting, and quiet reflection. His goal wasn't merely to look convincing on camera, but to open himself up so that something greater could shine through. That kind of preparation takes a toll. In interviews, Roumie admitted that he prayed constantly for God to help him get out of the way. He didn't want ego, fear, or fatigue to cloud the story. He wanted audiences to encounter Jesus, not Jonathan. That mindset explains why even his fellow cast members sometimes struggled to meet his eyes during the crucifixion scene. One Roman soldier actor confessed that after swinging the hammer, he felt overwhelming guilt, as though he had actually nailed Christ to the cross. He couldn't shake it, and when he looked at Roumie, still wearing the crown of thorns, he found it hard to separate actor from reality. This blurring of lines is exactly why Roumie's performance resonates so deeply with viewers. During the filming of the crucifixion, this tension between role and reality reached a breaking point. After the cameras stopped, Roumie was seen sitting quietly, eyes closed, still wearing traces of blood and sweat. He didn't rush to clean up or chat with castmates. He remained still, as though still carrying Christ in his body and soul. Others around him noticed and respected the silence. One actress later said, "It felt wrong to speak. It felt like he was still on the cross, and we were still there with him." Season 6 proved to be his most demanding season yet, but in that demand lay the very heart of his calling, to remind the world that the story of Jesus is not a distant myth, but a living truth. And if his own burden helps even one person see Christ more clearly, Roumie believes the wait is worth it. In biblical tradition, the serpent in Eden whispered truths that fractured innocence. In Hindu cosmology, the serpent Anantashisha sustains the universe through endless cycles of creation and destruction. Across the world, cultures separated by oceans all told stories of a serpent tied to cosmic order. The Asher tablets seem to suggest these weren't isolated myths, but reflections of a shared experience, a force observed and recorded in different languages and symbols. From my perspective, the most provocative aspect of this tablet isn't whether the serpent was real, mythological, or metaphorical. It's how timeless the fear is. The ancients may not have had computers, but they knew what it meant for human thought to be hijacked by forces beyond comprehension. Today, we frame it in terms of algorithms, propaganda, or AI shaping our decisions. Back then, they may have described the same phenomenon in mythic terms, as a serpent that dresses in our voices. And when the cast and crew gathered on that hill in Italy, Jenkins could feel the heaviness in the air. He later admitted that he cried more during that week of filming than at any other point in his career. It wasn't because things went wrong. It was because everything felt so right, so devastatingly real. He described the process in simple but profound words. This wasn't just direction, this was devotion. The presence of his wife, Amanda, underscored the personal toll. She flew to Italy knowing this would be the hardest stretch of filming for him. Strong leaders often need someone to lean on, and for Dallas, Amanda provided that steadying presence. Witnesses on set said they often saw her quietly holding his hand, or whispering encouragement when the emotions overwhelmed him. It reminded everyone that even those guiding the story needed support to carry it. What set Jenkins apart was his willingness to let himself be undone. Directors are usually expected to maintain composure, to hold everything together under pressure, but Jenkins allowed himself to cry openly. Crew members later said they had never seen a filmmaker so vulnerable, so unguarded, while still leading. By giving himself permission to feel, he gave everyone else permission too, and the result was unforgettable. When the cameras rolled on the hammer striking wood, Jenkins stood with tears streaming down his face. He didn't hide it. He let his own grief mingle with that of the actors and extras, creating a space where art became worship. Between takes, he would often walk slowly across the set, sometimes hugging cast members, sometimes bowing his head in prayer. One crew member recalled, "It felt like he wasn't just our director, he was our pastor." For Jenkins, The Chosen has never been about fame or numbers. Yes, he is aware of the show's global reach, hundreds of millions of viewers, translations into dozens of languages, theatrical releases in multiple countries. But when asked what matters most, he always returns to the same hope, that people walk away loving Jesus more. Whether viewers are lifelong believers or curious skeptics, his goal isn't just to entertain but to transform. The Crucifixion was the ultimate test of that vision, and by all accounts, it succeeded. Those who witnessed it didn't just see a powerful piece of cinema, they felt something holy. Jenkins didn't manufacture that atmosphere, he simply nurtured it, and in doing so, he reminded everyone why art matters, because it can be a vessel, carrying truth beyond words. Season 6 may have pushed Jenkins to his emotional limits, but it also revealed his deepest strength, not his ability to command a set, but his willingness to surrender it. By stepping back, by letting the story breathe, he allowed faith to fill the space. And for those who were there, it was no longer just filmmaking, it was devotion made visible. But the more we study these myths with modern tools, the more coherent the patterns become. AI doesn't project meaning, it finds statistical consistencies. And what it has revealed is not chaos, but structure. A structure so consistent that it raises the uncomfortable possibility that the ancients weren't just telling stories. They were tracking real cycles, patterns of disaster that humanity has forgotten, but may be destined to repeat. Think about it. When Egyptian priests described the return of the black waters, they may have been recording the same kind of sea level rise we now face from climate change. When they wrote of a star of fire, perhaps they remembered comets or meteors witnessed generations before. When the Asher tablet warned of voices that weren't human, could it have been grappling with the same kind of technological anxieties we now face with artificial intelligence? Of course, skeptics are right to caution against over-interpretation. But even if we strip away every mystical layer, we are left with this. Ancient people observed, remembered, and warned. They encoded their knowledge in symbols, stories, and cycles. And we, thousands of years later, are still struggling with the same challenges: climate upheaval, technological power, and the fragility of human societies. To me, that's the true power of these global parallels. They remind us that history isn't just about kings eat upon us again. So the question becomes, are we listening? Or, like the figures with their mouths erased, are we silencing the voices of the past just when we need them most? When the Abydos fragment and the Asher tablet were first dismissed as ordinary religious texts, scholars had only their eyes, dictionaries, and analogies to work with. But in the 21st century, a new tool entered the scene: artificial intelligence. What took human translators decades to wrestle with, AI could process in weeks. This isn't science fiction. Neural networks trained on dead languages have been able to recognize structural patterns invisible to the human brain. In the case of the Abydos inscriptions, AI didn't just match symbols to known words, it reconstructed syntax, found recurring cycles, and suggested that the text wasn't written as narrative at all, but as a data set. In other words, what looked like poetry was closer to a coded schedule of repeating events. That's why the year 2026 stood out. AI aligned the astronomical references in the fragment with actual star positions and lunar phases. He doesn't see The Chosen as a substitute for Scripture, but as an invitation to rediscover it. That's why fans who once engaged passively with their faith now report reading the Gospels with fresh eyes, saying, "I can picture it now. I can hear the voices. It feels real." The Crucifixion, once distant, becomes personal, but beyond religious circles. The series has also found unexpected resonance with those outside the church. Some skeptics, drawn in by curiosity, admit they stayed for the humanity. They may not embrace every theological claim, but they cannot ignore the honesty of the storytelling. In a polarized world where faith is often caricatured, The Chosen presents it without agenda, inviting questions, not forcing answers. That openness explains why the show's audience includes atheists, agnostics, and spiritual seekers who might never set foot in a pew, but will sit through an episode that makes them weep. The long-term legacy of this crucifixion scene may not be measured in ratings or reviews, but in changed lives. Already, reports circulate of people using the series in prisons, schools, and hospitals. Chaplains share episodes with inmates who see in the disciples' flaws a reflection of their own. Teachers use scenes to spark discussion about history, art, and belief. Families watch together, bridging generational gaps with a story older than any of them, but now brought vividly to life. Looking ahead, Season 6 is not the end, but a threshold. The full-length Crucifixion episode, set for theatrical release, promises to amplify the impact. If leaked clips already moved people to tears, the completed version may do what few films have achieved: make a global audience pause, reflect, and grieve together in a fractured world. That kind of shared sorrow might itself be healing. And then there is the question of legacy. When the series concludes after Season 7, will The Chosen simply be remembered as a well-made show? Or will it continue shaping how future generations visualize and understand Jesus? The crucifixion scene suggests the latter. By embedding itself in hearts, not just screens, it has already crossed into something more enduring: collective memory. Ultimately, the power of this moment lies in its reminder that the cross is not entertainment, it is encounter. Jenkins, Roumie, and the cast may have crafted a story, but the story itself carried them, reshaping everyone involved. That is why tears fell not just on screen, but off it. That is why silence followed instead of applause. And that is why audiences around the world lean in with reverence, sensing that what they are about to see is more than drama. For some, it will be the first time the crucifixion feels real. For others, it will reignite an old flame of faith. For all, it will stand as proof that even in the age of streaming and smartphones, the power of the cross still pierces through, reminding us that love is strongest when it looks like sacrifice. As we look ahead to the release of Season 6's Crucifixion episode and eventually the series finale, the invitation is clear. Don't treat this as entertainment alone. Treat it as a chance to remember. Remember that faith can still be told through story, that beauty can still carry truth, and that the cross remains the greatest drama ever lived. So let me leave you with a question. Do you believe God can still speak through art, through film, even through a show like The Chosen? Or do you think those things are too saturated by the world to carry something sacred? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. Your perspective might be the encouragement someone else needs. And if this journey has touched you, consider passing it forward, because stories like this are meant to be shared. Because in the end, what happened on that hill in Italy wasn't just acting. It was a reminder. The cross is not only a story to be told, it is a love to be encountered.